Welcome to our weird world, where each week we gather around the bonfire to uncover the world's most fascinating legends and mysteries. Tonight, we bring you the terrifying tale of the Banshee. So sit back, relax, and let the flames of our virtual campfire guide you through the spirits of the past. The moorland stretched for miles, barren and bleak, with only the wind to give it life. It was said that when the wind blew in a certain way, it carried with it the sound of a woman's wail, a sorrowful cry that pierced through the soul like a dagger. The locals knew better than to wander too far after dusk, for they had heard the tales of the Banshee, a harbinger of death and an omen of doom. Few had seen her, but those who had never forgot her face, pale as the moon, and her eyes as hollow and filled with an otherworldly sorrow. The people of Kildare whispered her name in fear, believing that to speak to her was to invite her into their homes. But despite the warnings passed down through the generations, curiosity always got the better of someone. And so, the legend of the Banshee continued to grow, her presence a shadow that loomed over the town. The O'Connors were one of the oldest families in Kildare, their roots tracing back to the time of the High Kings. They were known for their wealth, their sprawling estate on the edge of town, and the respect they had in the community. But for all their power, they could not escape the curse that seemed to follow their bloodline. Old tales spoke of a time when an ancestor of the O'Connors had wronged a woman of the fairy folk who had once ruled the land. It was said that she had been betrayed and left to die, her cries for mercy ignored. In her dying breath, she cursed the O'Connors, vowing that her spirit would haunt them forever. And so, the Banshee was born, tied to the family through blood and vengeance. Generations passed, and the Banshee's cries became a familiar, though dreaded, sound to the O'Connors. Whenever a family member was near death, the wail of the Banshee could be heard, growing louder and more intense as the end drew near. It was a sound that struck fear into the heart of even the bravest among them, a reminder that death was always close at hand. It was a cold autumn evening when the first signs of the Banshee's return began to show. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a strange, eerie melody that set the dogs to barking. Old Mrs. O'Connor, now frail and bedridden, had been ill for weeks, her strength slowly fading. Her sons, Eamon and Liam, kept a vigilant watch, knowing that the Banshee's cry would soon be heard. The O'Connor estate was filled with tension as the family gathered around the dying matriarch. The servants whispered among themselves, casting nervous glances toward the windows, half expecting to see the specter of the Banshee lurking in the shadows. Eamon, the eldest son, tried to maintain a stoic demeanor, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He had heard the Banshee's cry once before when his father had passed away, and the memory of it haunted him still. Liam, the younger of the two brothers, was more skeptical. He had never believed in the old legends, dismissing them as superstitious nonsense. But as the night wore on, even he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden silence fell over the house. The wind died down, and for a moment it seemed as if time itself had stopped. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a low, mournful wail began to rise. It was a sound unlike any other, filled with sorrow and despair, and it grew louder with each passing second. The Banshee had come. Eamon and Liam rushed to their mother's bedside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Miss O'Connor lay still, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed. But as the Banshee's cry grew louder, her eyes suddenly snapped open, wide with terror. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's here. She's come for me." Eamon tightened his grip on his mother's hand, trying to reassure her, but the fear in his own heart made it difficult to speak. Liam stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The wail of the Banshee was now deafening, filling the entire house with its unearthly sound. And then, as sudden as it begun, it had stopped. A cold, unnatural silence followed, and for a moment it seemed as if the world itself had gone still. Then, from the shadows at the foot of the bed, a figure began to materialize. The Banshee stood before them, her pale, ghostly form shimmering in the dim light. Her long, flowing hair was as white as snow, and her eyes were dark and hollow, filled with an eternal sorrow. She wore a tattered gown that seemed to shift and change like mist in the wind. In her hand she held a small silver comb, which she gently ran through her hair as she stared at the dying woman. Miss O'Connor gasped, her eyes wide with fear as she stared at the apparition. "No, please, not yet." The Banshee said nothing, but her gaze was filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. She raised her hand as if in a gesture of farewell, then slowly began to fade away, her form dissolving into the shadows. As the last traces of the Banshee disappeared, Mrs. O'Connor let out a final shuddering breath, and then she was gone. The days following Mrs. O'Connor's death were filled with mourning, but also with questions. Eamon and Liam were left to ponder the meaning of the Banshee's appearance. Eamon, who had always believed in the old legends, saw it as a fulfillment of the family curse. Liam, on the other hand, was determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. Liam began to dig into the family's history, searching for any clues that might explain the Banshee's connection to the O'Connors. He scoured the old family records, spoke with the town elders, and even visited ancient ruins said to be haunted by the spirits of the Tuatha De Danann. It was during one of these visits that he met a woman named Aoife, an old healer who lived on the outskirts of town. Aoife was said to have knowledge of the old ways, and it was rumored that she could communicate with the spirits. Desperate for answers, Liam sought her out. Aoife welcomed him to the humble cottage that she lived in and listened patiently as she told her of the Banshee's appearance. When he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "The Banshee you speak of is not just a spirit," she said in a soft, melodic voice. "She is a woman wronged, a soul bound to this world by a curse. Your ancestors betrayed her, and in her dying breath, she swore that her spirit would haunt your family until the debt was paid." "But how can we break the curse?" Liam asked, his voice full of desperation. Aoife looked at him with sad, knowing eyes. "The curse can only be broken by righting the wrong that was done. You must find a way to bring peace to the Banshee spirit, to release her from the pain that binds her to this world." Liam felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "But how do we do that?" "You must find the place where she died," Aoife said, "and there you must offer her what she was denied in life: justice." Determined to break the curse and free his family from the Banshee's wrath, Liam set out to find the place where the ancient wrong had been committed. His search led him deep into the moors, to a place long forgotten by time. It was a desolate, windswept valley where the ruins of an old castle lay hidden beneath the earth. Liam stood in the shadow of the crumbling walls, the weight of the past heavy upon his shoulders. He could feel the presence of the Banshee all around him, her sorrow echoing through the wind. This was where it all had begun, where the woman had met her tragic end. As he explored the ruins, Liam came across an old weathered stone half buried in the ground. He knelt down and began to clear away the dirt and debris, revealing a faded inscription. It was written in an ancient script, but Liam could make out the name, Saruka. The name sent a chill through him. This was the woman who had been wronged, the one whose spirit had become the Banshee. Liam knew that he had to find a way to communicate with her, to offer her the justice that she had been denied. He called out to the spirit, his voice trembling with both fear and determination. "Saruka, if you can hear me, I beg you to show yourself. I am Liam O'Connor, and I seek to right the wrong that was done to you." For a long moment there was only silence. Then slowly a mist began to rise from the ground, swirling around him. The air grew cold, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of a woman's wail. The mist coalesced into the form of the Banshee, her ghostly figure standing before him once more. But this time her expression was different. There was still a sorrow in her eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. "Why have you come here?" she asked, her voice like a whisper on the wind. "I've come to offer you justice," Liam said, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart, "to right the wrong that was done to you." The Banshee's eyes narrowed. "And how do you intend to do that?" Liam took a deep breath. "With your help, I hope to uncover the truth of what happened, and by making amends for my ancestors' betrayal." The Banshee seemed to consider the request for a moment, and then she spoke. "I will tell you where to begin searching. It will take time, but your persistence will be the start of your penance." With the Banshee spirit watching over him, Liam began to dive into the history of the O'Connor family. He sought out ancient texts, consulted with historians, and even visited the castles of Ireland in search of answers. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. It was a story of love and betrayal, of promises made and broken. Saruka had been a woman of the Tuatha De Danann, a being of great beauty and power. She had fallen in love with Liam's ancestor, Cormac O'Connor, and he had promised to marry her to unite the two worlds in peace. But Cormac had been ambitious and greedy. When the time came to fulfill his promise to her, he betrayed Saruka, choosing power and wealth over love. He abandoned her, leaving her to die alone in the moors, her heart broken and her spirit shattered. In her dying breath, Saruka had cursed Cormac and his descendants, vowing that her spirit would haunt them until justice was served. And so, the Banshee had been born, her sorrow and anger binding her to the O'Connor family for generations. Liam knew what he had to do. He had to make amends for his ancestors' betrayal, to offer Saruka the justice she had been denied. But how could he do that when the wrong had been committed so long ago? Liam returned to the ruins where Saruka had died, carrying with him the knowledge of what had happened. He called out to her once more, and the Banshee appeared, her form shimmering in the moonlight. "I know the truth now," Liam said, his voice filled with sorrow. "I know how my ancestor betrayed you, how he broke your heart. I'm so sorry, Saruka. I'm so sorry for what he did to you." The Banshee's eyes softened, but the pain in their gaze was still there. "Sorry will not undo the past." "No, it won't," Liam admitted, "but I can offer you something else. I can offer you peace." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver comb, identical to the one the Banshee always carried. "This belonged to you, didn't it? It was a gift from my ancestor, a symbol of his promise." The Banshee stared at the comb, her expression unreadable. "Yes, it was." Liam held out the comb to her. "I'm returning it to you as a symbol of my apology. I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope giving it can at least help you find peace." The Banshee hesitated, then slowly reached out to take the comb. As her fingers closed around it, a strange shimmering light began to surround her. The sorrow in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something else. Acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "You have given me what was taken from me, and what I have sought for so long. I can finally rest." With those words, the Banshee's form began to dissolve into the mist, the light surrounding her growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire valley. And then, just as suddenly as it begun, the light vanished and the Banshee was gone. Liam stood alone in the ruins, the silence around him deafening. He knew that the curse had been lifted and the Banshee's spirit had finally found peace, but he also knew that the memory of her would stay with him forever, a reminder of the power of love and the consequences of betrayal. The O'Connor family continued to live in Kildare, their lives forever changed by the events that had transpired. The legend of the Banshee became a distant memory, a story told by the fireside on cold winter nights. But for Liam, the memory of Saruka would never fade. He dedicated his life to preserving the history of his family, ensuring that the truth of what had happened would never be forgotten. And though the Banshee's cry was never heard again, the winds through the moors still carried with it a strange, mournful melody, a reminder of the spirit that had once haunted the land. And so, the legend of the Banshee lived on, a story of love and loss, of betrayal and redemption, a story that would be passed down through the generations as long as there were those who remembered. As we leave you here, remember, the tales of our weird world are boundless. If you've enjoyed immersing yourself in tales of redemption with us, please share, like, and subscribe to our channel for more content. Your support enables us to uncover the wailing behind the wall. Until next time, stay curious and beware the cries in the night.